China este foarte interesată de criza din Ucraina, iar motivele par mai complexe decât derularea pașnică a Jocurilor Olimpice de Iarnă de la Beijing. Se vorbește despre răsturnarea ordinii mondiale în care Statele Unite ar urma să fie detronate de tandemul dragonul și ursul, adică China și Rusia. Lumea nu se schimbă însă atât de simplu, pentru că America are la rândul ei aliați puternici în Europa, dar și în regiunea indo-pacifică. Velina Tchakarova este directorul Institutului Austriac de Politici Europene și de Securitate și face o analiză completă a acestor relații geopolitice tot mai complicate. Sunt Cristina Cileacu, începe Pașaport diplomatic. Velina Tchakarova, director at the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Thank you for having me.
Velina, the security crisis created by Russia drew the attention of China as well, and we were able to see that both President Xi Jinping and his Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, were involved in talking on various levels in order to de-escalate the situation with the crisis in Ukraine. Why is suddenly Ukraine have such big importance for China?
Well, of course, China is carefully observing the military escalation in eastern Ukraine, is also drawing its own conclusions as to how the United States, together with European allies, will tackle the crisis, will actually mitigate this escalation in order for China also to have a better clue about potential future conflicts at the diplomatic arena or any other arenas of the systemic rivalry between United States and China. And let's be absolutely clear about it. The current military escalation by Russia is in fact a threefold approach. Of course, it is mostly focused on Ukraine from a Russian perspective, but there are two important layers of this Russian approach, and this is why I need to also clarify it a little bit. And that is that the second layer is focused on the way how Russia wants to show the European NATO members, that means the European powers, as geopolitically irrelevant in this military escalation, from the point of view that they cannot really prevent a military attack from happening. Now we can discuss later, of course, the European response. And the third most important layer, which is a long-term oriented one, but it gives an additional support to the Russian position, is in fact the upgrading of the Russian position in the future systemic rivalry between China and United States. That means that Russia relies on diplomatic, to a great extent financial and economic backing in the case that, for instance, a massive response from the West will be introduced in terms of new grave sanctions. And that means that without this backing by China, Russia would probably have not considered this kind of escalation in this exact timing. But let's be clear about it. I mean, the threat by Russia is an imminent one and has been always in place since 2014, when Russia in fact invaded Ukraine and directly supported the separatist movements and annexed parts of Ukraine.
Xi Jinping publicly said that Vladimir Putin is his best friend. That's a fact. On the other hand, I have to ask, how much friendship is really between China and Russia in this condition that you just explained, and also considering their common history?
Well, of course, there is this interesting diplomatic layer of the relationship with both presidents having met for almost 40 times. Now, there will be also a very important visit by the Russian president to China for the opening of the Olympic Games, even though that if we carefully observe, I mean, we know that the Russian athletes are banned from competing, and yet the Russian president will be most likely sitting directly next to Xi Jinping, and that is of course a diplomatic, already a diplomatic win, let's put it that way, for both, because the Western countries have been already boycotting the Olympic Games, so there will be no serious representation by many American allies and also by many European powers. So in a sense, it is a capital, a diplomatic capital coming from Moscow. Now, if we talk about the relationship from a geopolitical point of view, of course there is much more to it than the diplomatic statements of an alliance that is going beyond any alliance and a relationship being at its best since the last 60 years. And here the way I see it is that it is not an alliance in this very Anglo-Saxon or Western way of looking at alliances and partnerships, which have to be based on a solid trust. But it is also not an intent or a marriage of convenience. The way I see it is a kind of a ad hoc modus vivendi of systemic coordination in various strategic domains for two main reasons. The first is to navigate through this transitionary period of the international relations, where both China and Russia seek to prevent any negative outcomes of the transition, of the transformation of the global order. That means, of course, protecting national interests first and foremost, and via coordination, they can actually back each other's positions on various international issues. But the second important goal, of course, is also to undermine the American influence and positions in all these relevant international affairs.
Do you think they will actually succeed, because there is this talk about the new world order where China will overcome United States with the help of Russia and Iran mainly?
We are just at the beginning of this transitionary period in the international affairs. United States is still this sole global power. That means power with global power capabilities, capabilities to deploy military power in every corner of the world, depending on the national interests of America, and at the same time with the global reserve currency. So in a sense, we have still one sole pole of power. However, what is new is now that China is competing over influence in all relevant areas. Take global finance, economy, trade, and then of course international and regional organizations, and take the technological domain into consideration. So it's going to be a kind of a long-term oriented comprehensive competition. And I think that the timing of this military escalation will reveal, probably not now, because right now we are dealing with the tactical developments, but at some point I'm convinced that it will reveal that it was also an effort of Russia to upgrade the position within this systemic rivalry in the long term, to basically present itself as a kind of an indispensable player in this systemic competition, because neither United States nor China would win a future competition against each other without Russia's participation. And yet again, neither China nor United States wants to see Russia as being part of the rivals bloc. So we have no clear answer to that. We have no clear answer when it comes to the competition in the digital domain, in the within the fourth industrial revolution, in the military domain, as well as also in the global trade financial and economic domain. And once again, when it comes to international organizations and also the emergence of new regional formations, we are observing a kind of bipolarization. The way I look at this transitionary period is that it is an increasing bifurcation of the global system with two poles of power. On the one side, United States with relevant allies, and on the other side, the dragon bear with, of course, relevant partners in all these strategic domains.
There are negotiations. Diplomacy is still the instrument used to defuse this crisis. But then again, both sides are preparing for the military part as well. NATO and the United States announced that they will deploy new troops, if necessary, on the eastern flank that include as well Romania, also Bulgaria. What should we consider? Because it's clear, NATO will not withdraw in the border of 1997. On the other hand, Russia will not concede as well. So what shall we expect in our region?
Well, I consider, once again, I consider this timing not as coincidental, first and foremost. Second, the danger of a military attack by Russia in the direct European neighborhood, not just in Ukraine, but also take the other Eastern European countries into consideration, is in fact permanent. And the most recent escalation has to show that Ukraine always have to fear an imminent Russian attack. Now, of course, with these impossible conditions that were imposed on United States and NATO following the military escalation from December, diplomatic round of negotiations was launched. Now, we, of course, have no idea about the written response by the United States and also, to some extent, NATO. I am analyzing the situation from the Russian point of view, what Russia really seeks to achieve. I think that the use of hard power, once again, the threat with hard power, was meant to start to initiate the process of negotiations with the United States, not with the European partners of United States and not with the European NATO members, but with the United States first and foremost. I think that these impossible conditions are, so to say, the conditions of Russia for a possible approximation with the United States at some point of time, if the United States really decide to lure Russia away from China in the long-term competition with China. So in a sense, I see this now as the beginning of a long-term process in which there will be, of course, many more diplomatic rounds. And in a sense, this is a kind of a testing by Moscow of the red lines of Washington. What is Washington really ready to give as concessions to Moscow? And of course, the most negative effect is the one of showing how geopolitically relevant the European powers have become. Of course, I'm not discussing that the leverage and the scope of European response in terms of sanctions, in terms of economic pain, financial pain will be decisive. That is without a doubt. But the main point is that the European powers cannot prevent a military attack from happening in the direct European vicinity. And that is the hard lesson that we will need to draw from the current episode. And in a sense, as I said, in reality, this testing of the red lines of Washington is long-term oriented. So I do not expect it in a month from now. First and foremost, I do not expect a military attack. I've already actually announced this publicly in December when the military escalation began appearing, that there would be a direct military attack prior prior to February 20, because right now this is a very important, very important diplomatic event, not just sports event for China, and I don't think that Russian president will actually initiate a military attack, even though that we've witnessed such episodes during previous military incursions by Russia during Olympic Games. I do not anticipate such move prior to February 20. And in the meantime, I do think that there will be further diplomatic rounds and further discussions. And what happens after 20th of February, of course, we may argue that Russia will need to set an example, will need to probably launch a military incursions, which will be very limited in scope and time, due to the price and due to the financial restraints and due to, of course, the human factor. But I do not expect a full spectrum military attack against Ukraine and no occupation. In a sense, it's really about the geopolitical positioning in the long term.
As you said, EU somehow becomes irrelevant when it comes to international affairs, and we witnessed that the negotiation, the talks, let's say, that Russia had about this crisis had only or mostly with Washington. European Union was the second line. We have internal issues, like always in European Union, because this is what European Union is also about. We see, for instance, Emmanuel Macron had a talk with Vladimir Putin trying to de-escalate. Olaf Scholz is much more interested in the German companies, and he accepted that he will participate into the sanction, but it's not clear how will. Viktor Orban is ready to travel to Moscow to meet Putin and ask for more gas. So will the European Union be able to give, besides the sanction, a unitary response towards Russian aggression? Well,
in fact, the West managed, and in this regard, America played a very positive role with this administration to create this impression, at least in diplomatic terms, that they have been coordinating positions, that they have been also involving their European partners in the process, that they have been reaching out to all relevant stakeholders. In that particular case, we are observing a clear difference from the previous US administration, where we knew that Trump actually did not respect international organizations and institutions such as the European Union or NATO. This is a major difference, and in that specific case, America really did a great job, and the European partners have been involved also within each other. Now, leaving the diplomatic terrain behind, in realpolitik terms, of course, psychology of power is very important, and here I at least identified the biggest dichotomy, because European powers will actually avoid a situation where the use of hard power would be required, and that would relate not just to Ukraine, that would relate to any other Eastern European country. Once again, I need to stress that in the case of a future military attack, I don't expect that there will be a direct military involvement by the European powers. So in a sense, this inability and unwillingness to, in fact, apply hard power to protect and safeguard national interests of the European member states is going to increasingly be problematic for the geopolitical clout of the European Union as an institutional actor, but also for the European powers. And you've mentioned another problem where I fear the biggest risk in the future to actually witness the emergence of conflictual lines, of cracks between the European members based on the geopolitical and geoeconomic interests of external actors on the old continent. On the one side, of course, their relationship with America, where we are clearly observing a shift. Some of the continental powers actually, as you named it, do not perceive China as a security threat to their national interests or to Europe as a whole. Then again, they have a very problematic relationship with Russia, for instance, Germany and France. The core of the European integration project after Brexit, after UK's exit, are in fact engaged or have been engaged in a rapprochement with Russia well for years. I mean, the French president has been initiating this process of approximation with Russia since at least 2020, and we know the case of Germany, which now declined almost any kind of support in defense terms to Ukraine, given the strong geoeconomic interests and ties with Russia. So I fear that this kind of conflictual lines between French-German axis and the way they want to move this project in the field of foreign and security policy, and Central European countries, which are very close with the United States because they still see the United States as the sole security provider for their national interests and for their territorial integrity. If these conflictual lines are further strengthened also by external actors such as China or Russia or Turkey, I fear that this may actually have a very negative impact on the coherence of the bloc, next to the inability of actually using hard power to protect and safeguard your own interests.
Velina Tchakarova, Director of Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și în reluare sâmbătă de la 22:30. La revedere!